Hi, it's Jenny here from the Narrate team. I'm the kids director at Narrate Church. This week, Adam asks us the question, what would it look like for kids and students to walk through life with growth-minded people? I'm excited as Narrate's vision grows as we continue serving more of our kids and students.
Hi, you guys. Happy Memorial Day. And let me just start by saying, for those of you that are helping us, what are we doing gathering this morning? We recognize, thank you so much. I understand that it's a 4-day weekend and, weather's perfect, so you should be camping. So thanks for making all of this happen. Yesterday, so it was rainy yesterday. My wife worked yesterday, and so the boys wanted to go fishing. I hate fishing, mostly because I can't. I don't qualify what I do as fishing. I qualify it as throwing metal into the water. And at one point, one of the boys was like, "Dad, why aren't the fish biting?" And I said, "Because you're a hushka. That's why the fish aren't biting." So eventually we left Spring Meadow and came back to the house, and we tried a woodworking project, but then I was reminded I don't have any woodworking skills either, and so that kind of went south. And then we started playing Monopoly together, which, when's the last time you've played Monopoly, right? So the boys were like, "Hey, can we play Monopoly?" We've done it one other time. Our youngest, JR, he won that time as well. But this time, I had two of the red properties, and I had two of the orange and one of the yellow, and Lincoln had two of the yellow, and he kept trying to get Marvin Gardens from me. And I'm like, "I'm not giving you Marvin Gardens. You're going to have to come up with something better than paying me what I paid for it." And he's like, "How about $300?" And I was like, "I paid $280. What worth is that?" So finally, he said, "Well, if I get the other red one that you need," or I forget what, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this. I think it was orange. I think I had two orange. He said, "If I get the other orange one, which nobody owned yet, will you trade me for the yellow one?" And I said, "Yeah, I would do that." And so what do you know, next turn, our youngest, he lands on the orange one that nobody owns. And Lincoln's like, "Justice, buy it, and I'll buy it from you." Problem was, Justice had no money, none. He had all the property, he had no money. And so Lincoln, I don't even know if this is fair, but who cares? Lincoln said, "Justice, I will give you the money to buy it if you'll just then give it back to me." And I said, "Well, you can't do that. You got to buy something for him." So he bought from JR, I think it was the electricity utility for the sum of $180, which I think is what the orange one cost. And so Justice got the $180. He bought the orange one. Then he looks at me, and he just had this giant grin on his face. I don't know where this stuff comes from. He's 8, I think. He said, "Hey, Dad, will you trade me for the yellow one?" So, "Sure, I'll trade you for the yellow one." I can already see what's happening here, right? So I trade him for the yellow one. Now he's got the one Lincoln wants, and I've got the one I need. And Lincoln's like, "Justice, come on, we had a deal." And Justice said, I'll trade you for my utility and $200. So he made $200 on the deal. And nobody even taught him that. So I don't know if that's indicative of sinful nature or good business practice. I'm not sure, but it was brilliant in my mind. Next week, we're going to start this brand new series called One But Two, and I'm excited to delve into this conversation about relationship and marriage, because you may have noticed that in marriage, two become one, but then there's often this conversation of okay, we're one, but are we also two? And there's some really difficult conversations that happen within the boundaries, and how much of ourselves do we lose inside of a relationship, and how much do we retain? And I would be lying if I said that I was an expert at this. I would be telling the truth if I said that one of the most helpful things that Teresa and I have learned in the last year or so has been around that dynamic of oneness and separateness and what's healthy. And so we're going to start that next week. It's Memorial Day, and so obviously it's not an ideal time to start a series. But we also watch these weekends as a way of going, okay, Kate calls them one-off weekends. But there are these one-off weekends where it's strategic to not do a series, and especially if we're not ending a series, to do something on its own. And this weekend has been circled on my calendar, going all the way back to January, just trying to pay attention to whatever impressions the Lord might have. I don't hear him speak audibly either, and I know you don't either. And so there's this trying to understand through wisdom and just all of that. Okay, Lord, what would we do on this weekend? And I've had several ideas and was working through those. And then last Thursday, the staff and I were sitting around in the morning time, because that's all we do. We just sit around and put together a few songs and then write a sermon. And it's just, you should work here. It's the easiest job. I'm just kidding. But people do ask Kate, what else do you do during the week? All you have to do is pick songs. Anyway, so we were talking, and suddenly it occurred to all of us that though it would not make a lot of sense to do kind of a vision weekend on Memorial Day, what we realized is there's some stuff that we've been working on pretty intentionally. The council's been on it. We've been on it. Some of you know we even had a consultant in here this last spring. And so there's some energy that we've been pouring into an area and some thought. A lot of it even relates to the first question people often ask me when they're talking to me for the first time is, so when's Narrate going to buy a building? And we go, we love this. Yeah, but there's no more seats at the 10 o'clock. I know, we're working on that. So there's this whole conversation, and really it deals most specifically with kids. And so it just occurred to us last Thursday, like, let's just kind of do this mini vision weekend, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but let's just drill down on this idea. And really the question that I want to ask, there's two, I suppose, but the first one that I want to ask this morning is, like, how are we serving kids? And by we, I mean us. I mean this movement. I mean this church. I mean this tribe. I think it's strategic because it's Memorial Day, because chances are if you're here that there's a high sense of belonging. Like, people don't generally go, I think I'm going to start going to church and then show up on Memorial Day. If that's you, that's fantastic too. But like, how are we as a place together? What's our vision for serving kids? And I guess the reason I ask that question, because I think there's a lot of unspoken things in a context like this. But because, some of you, it's like, is it indoctrination? Like, do we serve kids by indoctrinating them? Is that what we're doing downstairs? Is just pummeling them with truth, whether their parents are giving it to them or not? We're giving it to them because we get them for an hour on Sunday. Is that it? And at the other extreme, is it childcare? Is it fish crackers and a Dixie cup full of lukewarm water and be quiet so your parents can have a spiritual experience? Is that what it is? And of course, those are two extremes that probably don't represent any of your desires for your own kids. But the trick of a place like this is probably if we lined up a whole bunch of you who sincerely love and follow Jesus, you would have your own differing ideas as it relates to what it looks like to raise your kids up in this context. Some of you were raised up in this context, and you're working really hard to not repeat some mistakes. Some of you were raised up in this context, and you can't believe you're still here. Some of you had this very positive experience, and sometimes places like this make you feel ashamed of the fact that you're willing to admit that. And then there's people who, like, maybe you're someone who you're asking these sincere questions, like you used to believe, but you don't anymore, or you didn't, and now you're starting to. And maybe you've never even gotten to the kids part. I mean, you can't even begin to think about how to help them through it all because you can't even figure out how to get yourself through it all. Maybe for some of you, maybe for some of your friends, their hesitation with a place like this and an experience like this has very little to do with what's going on up here, but a lot to do with, but I don't want to take my kids to that place because they're going to indoctrinate them with all these social principles and all this, and I don't want anything to do with that. It's a messy topic, I think. It's one that we've barely touched on around here in our course of our 5 years together. Like, what is the vision that we have for kids? And notice that the word "your" is not in that question. I mean, some of you are already like, I knew I should have went camping. I knew I should have went and thrown metal in the lake this weekend because we're talking to parents. And if you hear nothing else this morning, if you're someone that comes from a place where your kids are in high school now, they're not in elementary school, they're not babies anymore, no more diapers, or your kids are gone, maybe your kids are my age, don't mean to make you feel old. I kind of feel old myself. But before you check out, if you get one other thing, maybe you don't have kids. And sometimes the most difficult thing about being a part of a community context is we're always talking to families and we're always talking to couples, and that's not where you come from. If you hear nothing else this morning, please hear that to whatever degree that we have a vision for serving kids, it relies as heavily upon those of you who don't currently have kids, if not more, than those of us who do. Because whatever ideas like Activate that we might have for kids, whatever they are, that the parents who are staring at kids all day, every day, they're the least likely to then also want to use their volunteer energy to serve kids. And that's not a bad thing. We've embraced that from the beginning. I've said we're not going to create this obligatory, if you've got a kid in the nursery, you've got to volunteer in it. Like, no, we're going to serve them. So please don't check out if you don't have kids. The other question that I want to ask is, how are we serving students? I'm thinking specifically of middle school and high school students. I spent my entire 20s serving students. Teresa and I, that's what we did getting ourselves through college. That's what I did when I graduated college. And the reality is that I've seen every gamut of parenting and every philosophy of youth ministry. Like, what is our philosophy as it relates to serving students? Is it do something that's more fun than what somebody else is doing that's unhealthy? Is it like, if we get enough pizza, then that pizza outweighs Bud Light? I mean, is it keep them safe? Is that the vision? Like, keep them safe? Is it indoctrinate? What is it? And again, before I even delve into this, I just want to say what's true of kids is just as true of students. If you don't have students, we are as dependent upon you to successfully serve students than we are anybody who does. As I already said, Teresa and I spent our 20s working in student ministry, and the result of which I feel like I saw it all. We worked with students who came from a context where their parents were very passionate about Jesus and very passionate about church, and so were their kids. We also worked in a context where we worked with kids in which the parents were very passionate about church and very passionate about Jesus, and their students couldn't have been more indifferent. We worked with students who weren't churched at all. They had zero spiritual background. And in some cases, their parents loved that they were a part of student ministry with us. Many times, those were the kids that were the most fun, the students the most fun to work with. But we also worked with students who, their parents were threatened by us. We worked with students whose parents loved Jesus and were threatened by the presence of student ministry in their life. And so there was this whole gamut. And I suppose this is, normal. Whenever you look back, you go, I was so arrogant when I was in my 20s. And then probably you look at me and go, you're so arrogant in your 30s because you're in your 40s. But when we walked away from student ministry, I was so sure that I had some kind of a workable formula as to how to have healthy middle school and high school students. And now I'm terrified. It's like, I don't have any idea. All my formulas are lost. Recently, Teresa and I found ourselves even in a somewhat hypothetical conversation. It wasn't really a real-time one, but could be, of when the boys are in high school, should they decide that they don't want to go to church anymore, do they have to? I'm a pastor, for crying out loud. I don't so are you. I work for a church. But there's this looming question of should one of them say their junior year, their whatever year, decide they're not going to church, do they have to? And that is a tricky question. And I've worked really hard on it for the last couple months. And so this morning I want to give you the right answer. Just kidding. I'm actually hoping one of you with gray hair will give me the right answer when we're done this morning, because I'm still lost. But it did force me to zoom out. It did force me to start thinking of my kids, and I guess what I'm hoping to do this morning is to get you to zoom out a little bit as you think of yours, and those of you that don't have kids, to think about how you could help those of us who do. Cause me to zoom out and think, whether I make them go when they're 17 or not, that's really not the issue. The issue is when they're 24, right? The issue is when they're 30. The issue is when they're 22. The issue is when they move off to wherever they're moving off to, and they're doing whatever it is they're doing, and they're making their own decision whether or not just to believe. There's really two issues, isn't there? Whether or not they're going to believe in Jesus, whatever that means in whatever context you want to talk about it, but are they going to be involved in this thing we call local church? And it forced me to zoom out and begin to just think about, what are the values behind the value? What are the questions behind the question? I dare say a pretty good exercise for all of you as parents. At the end of the day, what the fact that you're here, what do you want your kids to take? Your spiritual experience, what do they want to learn from you? And one of the things, one of the questions that I walked away from that with, and again, this is my own bias this morning. I am not an authority on parenting. I shouldn't even talk about parenting. My oldest is 11 years old. I've got almost nothing to say about parenting. But I do think there's some parallel here between the way we think about kids around here and kind of the vision that Jenny and Caleb and their teams have continued to work really hard on, and the way I've begun to think about this stuff myself. And the first one is this. What if we served kids and students? Go ahead to that next slide. What if we served kids and students by offering them relationships with growth-minded people? Now, notice I said growth-minded, not even Christ-centered, and you can fill in the blanks there. I'm really hardly even using the Bible this morning, not because I don't love it, but because I'm not going to force it this morning. But growth-minded is an intentional term, and we'll come back to it. But what if the value, and this is what I came back to as I've been thinking about my kids, at the end of the day, I know that's an overused phrase, I hope they value being growth-minded adults who value becoming better parents, better spouses, better leaders, better community members, better Christ followers, better just people. And I hope that in that, what they recognize is you are absolutely directed and impacted by your relationships, so you're going to need some good ones with some growth-minded people. I spent my entire 20s doing youth ministry and insecure because I was working for the best youth pastor anyone's ever seen, and I know everyone says that, but Vern was absolutely amazing. And I'd never even been to youth group. Like my first day on the job, more or less, was my first day as an intern. And it was rah. I mean, this is the 90s. This is the early 2000s. It was like, hey, Vern, and all this craziness and a couple hundred students. And they're just, I mean, it's this crazy fun. Like, he's the type of guy everybody wants to be around. And then there's me. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, nobody like goes, hey, there's a party and Adam's hosting it. No one goes to that party. Like, I thought he reads books. Like, I don't even know what you would do at that party. Watch the Broncos. I'm not sure. I realized after I was done that I was insecure for the wrong reasons because I realized that long before I did student ministry, I'd been prepared for it. In fact, I think I was prepared for student ministry before I even followed Jesus. It started no later than in 6th grade. When a guy named, if I can keep it together during this, when a guy named Aaron Reynolds entered my life. Dang it, hate it when this happens. Aaron was 3 years older than me, 4 years older than me. Can you throw me that water bottle? I think there's some testosterone in there and I need it. What was that? Wow. You should serve kids. When I was in, I don't know what to do with this. I lost my water bottle at Aylesford Trails, so now I have Kirkland. When I was in 6th grade, I had a sister who was a few years older than me. Aaron was a guy that started dating her. I was in 6th grade. He was a sophomore. He was an up-and-coming athlete, kind of the star guy in his class. He drove a 1965 SS Impala with a 4-speed and a 396. And he drove it the way some of you would drive a car like that. Had a brand new maroon paint job and nice vinyl interior. He wore everywhere he went. Remember the Nike Air Jordan pants of the 90s? Some of you are like, if you went to a campfire, you left naked because just the tiniest little spark would melt the plants. Remember those things? He wore Nike Air Jordan shirts. He had the hair. He had the glasses. He had this maroon leather coat. Like there's like 3 people on the planet that can wear a maroon leather coat. He was one of them. You know what Aaron did? He showed up at my basketball game. I remember sitting on the bench as a 6th grader going like, hey, see that high school kid up there with the cool hair? See that? He's here to watch me. And when basketball season went over, you know what he did? He showed up at my baseball games. I could still take you to places where I could picture his arms on top of a chain link fence. Just watching the 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way through. I used to love it when him and my sister would get in those petty high school like love relationship fights. Because that would mean I got to hang out with Aaron on Friday nights. And he would take me to Billings, and we'd go 130 miles an hour, and not endorsing that, but that's the kind of guy he was, and we'd go to a movie. I remember his junior year, he was on the varsity basketball team, and they didn't make the state tournament, but the state tournament was at the Metra. And Aaron took me Saturday, the championship round, and we just sat there like, here's me, here's Aaron, here's all of his buddies, watching basketball. When I was 17, he died from complications with leukemia. You know what happened 2 days before that? I met this couple named the Frickles. Jenny, I need you to throw me something again. It's crazy to me. He died 2 days before that. I met this couple named the Frickles because I was interested in their daughter, and she was from a previous marriage. They didn't really have a grip on her. She was kind of wild, but they did have one rule for her, and no, this isn't like code for what the answer to the question is, but their one rule, ironically, this is part of what messes me up, was she had to go to church once a week. They followed Jesus. They were part of this great church called Faith Chapel. You guys have met Stan and Rob. They come here often. She had to go once a week. So we were no dummies. We went on our own, and we skipped youth group. We went to the midweek service, and we'd sit in the back row of this fabulous church and listen to these phenomenal communicators. And I'd sit there and go like, these guys are freaks. And I sat there for 2 years. And the Frickles, they became family to me. My family fell apart before my freshman year in terms of divorce and things like that happened. And they became the family. That's who I hung out with. It's where I spent. They took an interest in me. I'd walk in the door at 9:30 at night, and Tracy would go, hey, Adam, the Cardinals won tonight. Like they knew me. And they got to know me, and they didn't preach at me. They just kind of let me walk with them. A few months after I graduated, her and I broke up, which was a good thing. And they did a very wise thing, though it didn't make sense to me at the time. They just completely removed me from their life. I totally respect what they did now. You know what happened that very same day? Very same day. This is insane to me. I met a guy named Fred Nelson, who's about 20 years my senior. And for the next, I don't know, until the week I moved here, Fred and I went for a walk every other week. Fred was an insurance agent. You guys would love Fred because he was this guy who loved Jesus but wasn't all into the religious stuff, was incredibly grounded, one of the most solid disciple makers I've ever known. He is the most solid I've ever known. And every other week we'd go for a walk. And we weren't like reading the Bible, like we weren't doing these hyper spiritual things. We were talking about Jesus and life and work. I still remember the day I was like, hey, Fred, you know that gal Teresa that I introduced you? Yeah, I'm thinking about asking her to marry me. He's like, what do you say if I think you're crazy? I said, I won't do it. He said, I think it's a great idea. And he wasn't a control freak, but he just, like, if Aaron taught me the power of taking an interest in another person, for better or for worse, Fred taught me that you don't learn anything about Jesus outside of the context of relationship. That everything we learn in the context, that this in so many ways is an excuse for the one-on-one and the one-on-two and the people actually doing the work of life together. And it got me thinking about kids and the way Jenny and the way her team is talking about kids. And we said, and it just got me thinking, what if we served kids by simply offering them relationship with people who are growth-minded? What if that was the win? And that leads me to this place in 1 Thessalonians. Part of the reason, you guys, why I'm not using the Bible, and maybe this is wrong much this morning, is because, like, I don't know where I would stop. Like, Jesus became human. That's the message, right? Like, he didn't go like, hey guys, here's a book, here's a water bottle, we'll miss you, but like, here's a sermon, here's a podcast. None of that. He went, here's me for 33 years in the flesh doing the stuff you do. Like, I'll just do it with you. I know I can't fish either, but we'll go, you can't fish, I can, we'll go fishing. It was relationship. And I love the way Paul says it in 1 Thessalonians 2. Paul, this early leader of the church, said, because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives. From day one, they understood that truth is conveyed via a relationship. Listen, you may disagree with me here. I have no control over what my kids choose to believe. I don't think it's my job to make them a Christian. It's why when we stand up here and we dedicate kids, we go, we're going to work our dogs off to do everything we can to influence them to follow Jesus. My hope is that they value relationships with people who want to grow. And that leads me to 312 Fuller. 312 Fuller is an answer to the question, is Narrate going to build a building? And the answer is no. The reality is what we realize is the area where we have the most pressing needs are in the kids. Narrate kids. It's not uncommon for them to have 25 preschool kids in this little tiny space. And so we said, we as adults, we can do. There's room for growth up here. There's not down there. And so Caleb was the first one to mention this place that's been empty since we lived here. 312 Fuller, by the way, if you're trying to place it, is basically between the Montana Club and the title company. Some of you who have been here for a long time know it as Miss Kitty's from years ago, if that helps. Just saying it like it is. But it's this 1,800 square foot studio space that's built and designed to be an auditorium. And so with Deb helping us on the real estate end, we signed a lease on May 1st for 312 Fuller. The idea here is to build it into an excellent, Narrate caliber, excellent auditorium space. But more than that, you guys, it's a classroom for the 4th and 5th graders. That's really the biggest deal. What we're going to do is we're going to use that. You access it through the same parking lot. The younger elementary kids will go there for their large group experience because we've already invested in some pretty neat stuff and sound system to try to build that space so there's a high level of excellence for 50 or so kids. But before they're there and after they leave, that little portion's about 20 minutes. The rest of it is it's the classroom for kids. And we hope to have foosball tables and air hockey tables and one of those basketball hoops and stuff, because what we think is that what a fourth and fifth grader needs is dramatically different than what a first and second grader needs. And more than that, what gets me excited is a fourth grader, a fifth grader walking into the 10 o'clock gathering and having teacher Steve or teacher whoever go, "Hey, Luke, how was your football game yesterday? How'd that dance recital go?" Not talking to, might be talking to Luke, but like the relational element. For us, the win is, we hope all of those age groups, none of those teachers are there for childcare and fish crackers. But the older the students get, the older the kids get, the more we hope that the win is relationship. And here's where I really get excited. The ground that has been laid by those before Caleb and then the team with Caleb more recently has really taken the student stuff to a neat place where it's not this giant midweek church service for students. What we have right now is a group of high school kids who are meeting in a living room with a group of great leaders, and they're talking about the message from Wednesday or from Sunday, and they're talking about life, and they're talking about dating and all that comes with high school and all this stuff. And they're going to track meets, and they're hanging out together, and they're doing life together. Simultaneously, we've got these two couples who are doing a phenomenal job with the middle school kids. And again, it's not this giant attractional pizza party. It's sitting in a living room and going, "Get off the couch with the pizza." Like there's some anxiety there, so we think they might use this annex. We're calling it the annex, by the way, the 312 Fuller space. I wanted to call it the ghetto, but the staff said that was too much. It's kind of the ghetto when you go down that cool alley, but it cuts both ways, I guess. And they're just hanging out. And they're just doing life with these middle school kids. Here's where I get excited about the way what Caleb and Jenny are doing with the kids and the students really complements one another, is what we've started talking about more recently is what if we don't pass the fifth graders to the middle school group? In fact, what if what happens every year, every couple years, is one of those fourth and fifth grade teachers from Sunday, one of those couples, or two individuals, whatever, whether they're 140 years old or 20 years old, we don't think that really matters, by the way. But what if every year, every couple of years, that teacher, a couple of those teachers, they just go with the fifth graders. And they just go like, hey, we're just going to do this thing as long as you guys are willing to put up with me. I'm just going to walk with you all the way through middle school and all the way through high school. And what we're dreaming about with the middle school group now is not that they'll pass them off to the high school group, but that and we're risking over-promising and under-delivering. We get that. But that they'll just walk with them until they graduate. And with those high school kids, all the same. Just doing life and going to football games. And we transition from boogers and farts in sixth grade to, girls and sex and drugs their junior year. And we're just talking life and doing life. What if the win for the way we thought about how do we serve kids and students was to go, we need some growth-minded people who are broken and honest about their limitations and eager about the grace of God found in Jesus, and they're just going to walk with students and walk with them for as long as those students will allow. I was meeting recently with a friend. My kids are growing up in a context altogether different than mine. That's not lost on me. I didn't go to church. My kids are here often. I wasn't raised in this kind of active Christ-following culture. They are. And so one of the things that terrifies me is everything, quite honestly, that made Jesus so attractive at 19 was the unfamiliarity of it all, the chance to form a new identity. That they won't have that experience. It'll be familiar to them. They'll make an altogether different decision than the one I got to make. And so I lean heavily into those of you who were raised in church. And there's one guy in particular who he's a PK. He's a pastor's kid. And solid, best I can tell. We're all solid, best we can tell in this context, right? And so we were having lunch. It's been, I suppose, a couple months ago. And this is a couple who, listen, they don't need this any more than anybody else, I suppose. They know how to read their Bibles. They know how to make Christian friends. They've got people they're hanging out with. And I don't even know how we got on it, but this is when I was working hard on this question, like, will we make our kids go? And at one point, he looked at me, and again, I can't remember how we got there, and he more or less said, you know why I value going every Sunday? You know why my wife and I value the Sunday experience, Adam? I was like, no, I would love to know. And he said, we value it because we value what it means to be pastored. Now, I don't even like to be called pastor. But I leaned forward, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, we believe that you and the staff are hearing from God during the week. And listen, that makes me uncomfortable, because I think we all hear from the same God on the same levels, but just hear him out. We think that you are getting impressions, if that helps, from God in preparation for Sunday gatherings. And I show up on Sunday eager to know what God has for me, eager to know what I need to think about. And that was like, wow, that's honoring and humbling. And it gets me to the second thing. What if we served, what if we served kids and students by modeling for them what it looks like to keep growth a priority? Like if our part together is, let's give them relationships with people who value growth. If that's Narrate's part, what if your part as a friend, as a grandparent, as a parent, what if it's modeling that to them? You know, there's the context that I was raised up in, and those who taught me this, I suppose, they were all at the office by 6 a.m, reading their Bibles and doing their quiet times and doing their prayer time. And I remember, and with all due respect to them, I remember when Teresa and I first started having kids, we're relatively unintentional with our kids, like to a fault, if we were to be honest, in terms of spiritual development. Because I'm so freaked out by this that I'm kind of just like, I don't know, just go to church. Jenny will tell you. That's kind of like honestly. But one of the things that we've done very intentionally, and I remember going like, no, I'm not going to the office. Because one of the things that is very important to me is I want my kids at 22 years old to have a picture of the fact that in the morning when you get up, 99 times out of 100, mom and dad have been up for an hour, and they've been reading, they've been reflecting, they've been praying, they've been thinking. They've just created space in their life for God to go, hey, Adam, you need to confess this. And you need to work on this. And oh yeah, do you remember that I love you despite your performance? Like if I've been intentional about everything, it's been modeling to them. And part of what that process did for me, I'm sorry there's so much me in this. I don't know what else to do because that's who I am. Is to go, what I want my kids to take from watching me is that I hope what they understand, despite all my weaknesses and all my idiosyncrasies and all my problems, I hope they understand me to be a person who was passionate about growth. And that what I understood, and here's why I'm so comfortable giving this message without talking a lot about the Bible, that what I understood is that a person who's passionate about growth will quickly learn that Jesus is not someone to be threatened by. That if growth is the goal, whether you're talking your work, your career, your vocation, your parenting, your relationships, your finances, your physical health, your emotional health, your chemical health, whatever you want to talk about, if growth becomes the goal, Jesus is not a threat. He's like the king of the world. In fact, some people said, this guy's the king of the world. He's the best. I was reminded this week of a place in Deuteronomy, and just as a reminder that this isn't just Jesus who thought this way. In Deuteronomy, Moses is getting ready to send off his people. They're going into the promised land. He doesn't get to go with them. Listen to the way he talks about, go ahead to that next slide, the way he talks to them about the text, about truth. And now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? I mean, this is like graduation day. But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today. And look at the last 3 words. Four words? English, not math. For your own good. I hope what my kids understand is that God is secure enough to go, listen, if you follow me, I can help you. I'll show you what it means to be fully human. This entire human experience, it happens best in the context of me. And the reason why we are such students around here of psychology and the sciences is because they complement what God has been saying. They don't threaten it. What if the win was to model for them what it means to be a growth-minded person? And I suppose one of the scary questions that raises, especially for those of you that do have kids and students in the home, and quite frankly, even if they're 35 and you feel like you've lost influence, you haven't. I'm 36. My dad still has influence. You still can influence. Are you modeling for them what it looks like to be a growth-centered person? That's what I love. I guess the reason why I love growth-centered and not Christ-centered is because, unfortunately, Christ-centered could mean static. I don't think it does accurately, but it could mean like I just don't do and I do, and there's this life that I've already created and I've already found and I've already figured out, and I just stay here. Like that's the goal so many times of Christianity. Just stay here. Don't lose this spot. Growth-orientated, to me, it assumes something entirely different. That means that when you're in your 30s, you look back on your 20s and go, geez, I was such a schmuck. And when you're in your 40s, you look back on your 30s and go, like how much have your views changed in the last 5 years? That might be an indicator of like how growth orientated are you? Listen, as I think about kids and students around here, I think the gift that we can give them is of a relationship with someone who takes an interest in them and models for them a way of life that is desperate for God's grace and eager to work hard to live that out. I have this distinct memory. I was in my mid-20s. I was talking to a family member who I have the utmost respect for. He's a follower of Jesus, a very successful businessman. He and his wife they've got a jillion kids. They have 6, I think. Sorry, no offense if that's a jillion to me. And they're just a really neat family. And I'll never forget this day where I was 20-something and giving my life to student ministry. And again, I don't know how we got on the topic, but he at one point said, Adam, when my kids, when they're in middle school and high school, I could care less if they're involved in a youth group. I was like, and I wasn't mature enough or quick enough to engage him then, but it stuck, the way things stick. And it must have been my next walk with Fred. We were walking, and I was sharing this with him. He actually knows this family member of mine as well, and I was sharing this story with him. And you know how it takes you like 15 minutes to get it all out? Because you're not just trying to get the facts out with the emotion, and if you could persuade them in your direction while you're at it, that's a good thing too. So I don't know how many blocks it took me to kind of get this whole story out. And I'll never forget when I was finally done, Fred just looked at me and he said, I certainly hope he understands that when his kids are in middle school and high school, he's going to need them to have relationship with people who reinforce his values. And I was like, wow. Yeah. And here I am with kids, and there you are with kids. And that's it, right? Man, if there just be somebody who their interest wouldn't be indoctrination, just who will care about them, take an interest in them, take them to a Forest Service cabin for a weekend and light farts on fire. I mean, do dumb, silly stuff. And then maybe if that person could be at their high school graduation, and then maybe when they get themselves sideways in college for the first time, maybe if they don't feel safe calling me, maybe they'd call them. Listen, I'm not here to twist any arms, but I do want to convey that there is remarkable opportunity, whether you've raised your kids or you're single or you're somewhere in between, to serve kids and students by going, I'm not, the fish crackers are just part of the deal. I'm here to take an interest in kids. I'd like to pray for you. God, Lord, there's not a person here, I suppose, who isn't grateful for different individuals you brought into our life at key points. And God, we read about your son becoming flesh, And then we reflect backwards in our own history and we recognize you keep doing it over and over and over and over again. And God, so we just collectively say thanks. Thanks for rescuing us via strategic relationship. And God, as we think of kids and students that we ourselves are influencing, raising, helping friends raise, God, would you bring intentional relationships into their lives? We love you, Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.